Good evening or good morning to you, wherever you may be. Welcome to the U.S.-China Education Trust's launch of our new webinar series, A Conversation with Asian Women Trailblazers. This series represents USET's commitment to empowering Asian women as leaders and agents of positive change. Asian American women suffer the double jeopardy of racism as Asians and sexism as women. Stereotypes further cast Asian women in images of the demure, docile China doll, or the sensual and selfless Madame Butterfly, or the treacherous but powerful Dragon Lady. And in today's world of technology, Asian women are the perfect, hardworking, conscientious, and undemanding worker bees. Well, today, USET brings you two Chinese American women who have defied all stereotypes and made history. The Honorable Elaine Chao, first Asian American woman appointed to a president's cabinet, twice, and Congresswoman Judy, the first Chinese American woman elected to the U.S. Congress. I am honored to join them as the first Asian American ambassador in U.S. history, and I'm delighted to moderate this conversation. Before we begin our conversation, I want you to look at this photo. Trenton, can we have that photo?
Oh.
When we were young. Do you in the audience recognize us? There's Judy and I standing on one side, and Pauline Cui, the woman whose memory we are honoring today, on the other side. This photo was taken in 1982 in Los Angeles at an Organization of Chinese American Women conference. Pauline Cui, as you may know, was the founder of OCAW. And we have two additional trailblazers in that photo. One, standing next to Pauline, is Lee Chen. She was the first Asian American woman mayor. Standing next to her is Linda Cao Yang, the first woman appointed by the US government to a multilateral financial institution. So we're going to have to get them on the program as well later. So, okay, I think that's enough of the pictures of when we were young. Judy, do you remember that?
I do. You were both so cute. You're cute now.
The China doll syndrome, or is the Dragon Lady? Now we're Dragon Ladies, right? Okay, well, I want to offer a few highlights from both Secretary Chao and Congresswoman Chu's impressive careers. You can track their journeys to the top that way. Secretary Elaine Chao immigrated to America at the age of 8, not knowing how to speak English. You know, Elaine, I immigrated to the United States when I was 9, and I did not speak English. So we share that. She received her citizenship at the age of 19. Prior to being Secretary of Labor and Secretary of Transportation, she was President and CEO of United Way of America, one of the country's top charities, where she restored public trust after it had been tarnished by scandal for financial mismanagement. She was also Director of the Peace Corps, where she launched the first Peace Corps programs in the Baltic nations, the former Soviet Union, and China. Secretary Chao began her public service as a White House Fellow. She then served as Deputy Maritime Administrator, Chair of the Federal Maritime Commission, and Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation. As you can see, she worked herself up. Now let's turn to Congresswoman Judy Chu. She was born in Los Angeles, California. Her father was a World War II veteran and her mother a war bride from Guangdong, China. She is a psychologist and was a psychology professor for over 20 years. Congresswoman Chu entered politics in the 1980s to oppose an English-only anti-immigrant movement in Monterey Park, where she still lives today. Her first elected position was to the Garvey School Board of Education. In 1988, she won election to the Monterey Park State Assembly seat. In 2001, earning a reputation for bridging ethnic lines. She served, by the way, as mayor of Monterey Park 3 times during her 13-year tenure. Termed out in 2006, she won a seat in the California Board of Equalization, the state's elected tax authority. The rest is history, as Congresswoman Chu in 2009 became the first Chinese American woman elected to U.S. Congress. And you notice, she didn't become Congresswoman in one day. She also worked her way up. And I guess I can say that there's no free lunch, for at least not for Asian American women. So now let's begin our conversation. I want to ask you both a question that I have often been asked myself. How did you manage to mainstream into American society? Recently, I read a comment by Darren Walker, president of the Ford Foundation. He said that in order to succeed, he had to leave his Blackness at the door. Do you feel you have had to give up some of your ethnicity to be successful? Who would like to start?
Congressman, would you like to, or I'll start, whatever. I'll start.
Why don't you start then?
Okay.
I never felt that way. You know, I grew up in a very strong family, which is a tremendous blessing for all Asian Americans because we tend to have a very strong emphasis on the family. I come from a family of 6 daughters. So my parents always emphasized our Chinese background, and we celebrated all of the holidays. We ate Chinese food at home, and they really encouraged us to cherish both our Eastern values and our Western values. So I think, you know, I think our country is becoming more diverse. There perhaps was pressure to leave one's heritage at the door, but I think we're now so much better in terms of celebrating diversity. So Congressman, what do you think?
Well, I feel that I've always had to run parallel tracks. And as an Asian American elected official, I have 2 constituencies. I have my Asian American constituency, which is goes beyond the borders of the districts that I represent. And then I have the mainstream community. And I work very, very hard to make sure that they know I am representing their needs. So I've kind of been doing both in a parallel fashion. I have worked so hard on things that I think are appealing to the totality of my district. For instance, I got a veterans health clinic in my district. I got 2 small business development centers there. I was the lead in making sure that our San Gabriel Mountains became a national monument. At the same time, I have worked hard to represent the Asian American voice because I know that hasn't been represented in government for such a long time. And in fact, Asians were invisible on Capitol Hill, so much so that in the olden days, if you walked by one, you had to just turn and look. It was so unusual. Well, that has changed so much. But one of the things that I did when I got to Congress was to become chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. And I have been very, very proactive in making sure that we are outspoken on AAPI issues, And in fact, one of the first things I did was to get an expression of regret by Congress for the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, one of the most discriminatory laws ever passed. And of course, which hurt so many generations of Chinese Americans, preventing them from becoming naturalized citizens. So it's those kinds of things that that I want to do to make sure that the Asian American voice is heard. And yet I also want to know, want people to know that I am a representative for all of them, for all of their needs.
Judy, you said something quite interesting. You said, for a time before, there's my husband saying,
Hello, Stuart.
Hello, Elaine. Madam Secretary. Hello, Congresswoman. How are you?
My husband is showing his support.
Yes. I just raised the money. You guys do a great job.
Okay. Anyway, let's get back to the question. I thought it was very interesting what you said about the invisibility of Asian Americans, not just women, in politics. And I wonder whether you both of you can elaborate on that, because you both chose careers in government and public service. And I did too. It's quite rare. And I wonder also whether you might think about some of the young people in our audience, young Asian American women in the audience, because, to this day, Asian parents are still pushing their children to get into the STEM or in the sciences, math, science, technology, so that their children could have a chance at a good job, a secure job when they graduated. And so many, I think, Asian young people have had to give up their dreams. So what can you tell them? What can you tell them about really doing what you dream of, your passion is? If it's not STEM, it's okay.
Well, one thing I strongly believe is that those who have a seat at the table should look like America. Otherwise, the decisions that we make are not done with the full perspective of everybody in mind. And so that's why I always push for representation. But I can tell you that it has been a long, hard road. And for Asian Americans, we were not represented, that it was very difficult for them to get elected to these kinds of offices, even as recently as 20 years ago. So we have had a time, indeed, trying to get more representation. It's not something, you are correct, it's not something that parents encouraged Asian American kids, their kids, to pursue. Running for office is a highly visible way to possibly fail. It's a riskier kind of thing to do. You have to be very outgoing, and you have to do all kinds of speeches, and you have to do handshakes galore. This is pre-COVID era, And so that goes against what many people have been raised to be. So it does take a different set of skills. Thankfully, AAPIs have been learning it bit by bit. And now actually we have 21 AAPIs in Congress, which is our highest number in history.
Well, Elaine, tell us what you think.
Yeah, I've only been in politics as a spouse, but I've had a pretty close ringside seat as to what it takes. And I think sometimes, at least for the first generation, the hurdles to coming into the political arena is that number one, you have to communicate. And in the past, having an accent was a disadvantage. We're getting better now in terms of being more tolerant of people with accents who enter into the political arena. But secondly, as Congresswoman Chu mentioned, you have to be relatively outgoing, and you have to raise money. So that means you have to network and you have to ask. And those are skills which takes time to develop. When most of us came here as immigrants, our first concern was just to survive, to have enough to survive, live, send our kids to school, whatever. And then I think as our financial situation stabilizes and gets better, we can begin to think about, getting involved in other aspects of mainstream America. But I think there's also a cultural aspect to public office, which, as the Congressman mentioned, does take some getting used to, some learning. And I think with the second generation, we're seeing more and more participation. And as our country becomes more diverse, we're being more open to accepting leadership that may come in a different looking package.
Okay, now you talk about culture. I think for all Asian Americans, we have to navigate between the American culture and the Asian culture because they're quite different. Can you talk a little bit about how you did that? Which aspect of, because we talked about mainstreaming, which aspect of American culture did you find more difficult to adapt to or to deal with?
It is true that Asian Americans have been taught to listen, to respect, to be able to take your turn. And many times politics is not that way. In politics, sometimes you just have to get out there and push to say what you think should be said, complain, which may not be an Asian American thing. But for instance, if there is polling being done by a newspaper and they always only poll whites, blacks, and Hispanics and leave out Asian Americans, you have to complain. And retraining yourself to do that is very, very important, because I do believe what you just said, the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
To be assertive. I guess you're saying the Asian Americans may not be assertive enough because these hate crimes that are happening, we're beginning to get some attention. But had these kinds of things happened, I mean, they do happen to other minorities, blacks and Hispanics, there's a huge uproar. For us, I'm not sure there's most people know about it. What is that? I mean, how does that happen? As you said, Judy,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
Asian Americans are counted as minorities when when it's beneficial to who's counting, but we're not counted when it doesn't matter.
I do have to say, though, that there are a lot of allies. I mean, and I'm in the whole middle of the leading the effort to fight the AAPI hate crimes due to COVID-19. So I have been conducting a campaign, leading a campaign to get more education out there so that, for one thing, AAPIs report the hate crimes, but also so that we can get actions done on it. And in fact, we introduced some bills in Congress. We had press conferences. We had letters. We had hearings. So we had all kinds of things. And there are many people that want to help, that see this as wrong, that want to do something about it. So I do think that we have many more allies, but I am concerned that there may be those that think that it's easier to pick on these AAPIs. And most recently, in the last couple of weeks, we've had these elderly Asian Americans that have been attacked. In San Francisco, an 84-year-old man was just walking in his neighborhood and was murdered. And then there in Oakland, Chinatown, there was a 91-year-old man who was just pushed over and he fell on the ground. And then in New York, an older man was slashed in the face. So is it that there are those that think it's easier to pick on AAPIs? I don't know. That concerns me.
I think the trends are very, very concerning.
Yeah.
And I was co-chair of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And we actually worked with the Department of Justice and the local community group. They have what's called the community policing and advocacy groups in the Justice Department that liaise with the communities. And so we worked with the Justice Department to get out the resources and also the knowledge and information that for people who have been harassed or who see someone else being harassed, that they feel that they can go to the Justice Department. Then we also had the Justice Department staff go out to the community and emphasize that there is recourse if indeed these crimes occur. And so I think the Congresswoman is right. We need to be encouraging our people to not be shy about reporting these crimes. I think what also happens is that we're such a small part of the overall national population until recently. When I first came to America, the AAPI population was less than 1%. It's now almost 7%. Mm-hmm. So with greater population growth within our community, we will naturally be viewed and treated with more gravitas. And I think that's a good thing.
Well, let's all hope so. I want to push you a little bit on the cultural aspects on the Chinese side. Traditional Chinese society is very patriarchal, and women's role was basically to procreate, to have a son even, not just a daughter, so that the family name could be carried on. The three of us are all married, and neither of us have children. Now, how did your parents deal with that? Was that a work-life balance issue? Or was it just happened?
Judy, do you want to take that or do you?
Oh, well, you remind me of what made my mother the happiest. And that is for me to study hard, work hard, and marry a nice Chinese boy. Yeah.
I was going to ask you that because Elaine and I are married to white Americans, but you married a Chinese American. I was going to ask you whether it was a conscious decision.
Yeah, strangely enough, I did all those things: study hard, marry hard, work hard, and marry a nice Chinese boy. But yeah, I didn't fulfill the part about children. Nonetheless, after a while, they got used to it. I guess at a certain point, I just had to forge my own way. Initially, I actually followed the traditional stereotypical Chinese pathway, which is I majored in math when I went to college, and also was going to be a computer scientist. Then I took Asian American Studies, and it was as though a light went off in my head. I understood what was going on in our country in terms of discriminatory laws being passed, like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. How could Congress pass this terrible discriminatory bill that prevented Chinese from becoming naturalized citizens, and prevented a whole class of people from being able to immigrate? Well, it became clear that it was our government that was doing that. And that's when I decided I was not going to go the stereotypical route, that I was going to get involved in politics. I still didn't think I would be an elected official, but I did change my major so that it could help people. I changed it to psychology, and I started being very, very active in advocacy organizations, and then eventually ran for office. So I guess it started with that Asian American Studies class and going a different route.
We can go on talking like this forever. However, we have an audience and the questions are beginning to come in. So I want to ask you one last question specifically about your careers. how did you choose going into retail politics, Judy, and Elaine into government public service, Elaine? What was your proudest moment in your careers? What did you consider to be your biggest, your best achievement? I think, Judy, why don't you begin on this one? Elaine, after Elaine answers, we'll open it to the audience.
Well, I knew that I wanted to change society for the better, but I still didn't think I was going to be an elected official. It wasn't until there was this ugly anti-immigrant English only movement in Monterey Park that I began to see that it was important to be in the electoral arena. What happened was that there were many new immigrants moving into the city, and it changed the face of the city. The stores changed, the restaurants changed, so the signs on the cities changed. And so some of the old residents had a hard time with it. And they wanted English only on the signs in the city, only English books in the library, and for only English to be spoken in the city. And in fact, the last straw was when they passed a resolution like that, saying that only English should be spoken in the city. So I got together with a multi-ethnic group of activists. We got thousands of signatures on petitions and got that resolution overturned. But it then became clear that the representation on the city council was not reflective of the city. So that's when I ran and won, and actually spent the next 13 years working to bring people together, to bring about an appreciation of diversity, and also to show that an Asian American elected official can be a good representative for the entire city. One thing led to the other. I got in the state assembly, the Board of Equalization, finally Congress. And my proudest moment, well, my proudest moment was the day after I got elected to Congress. That was when President Obama called me from the White House to congratulate me on becoming the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress in history.
Okay. Elaine, how about you?
What was the question again about what was the proudest moment, or
What
career?
were you
How
most
did I
proud
choose
of in terms of your
It was
career?
by accident. It was totally
Accident?
by accident.
What?
And so I want your audience to feel, heartened. I had no particular plan, but what my parents gave me was something very precious, and that was a sense of curiosity and a sense of adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I had just stayed within my little community, the biggest accomplishment was if you can marry a PhD, and if you can also obviously have sons. But my parents never thought that way. They believed that the world outside was so much bigger than our little community. And they encouraged us to go out and explore because they were confident that America offered opportunities that, even though they themselves could not imagine what those opportunities were, they were confident it was out there. So they encouraged us to explore, which is what led me from business school to banking, and then from banking to the White House Fellowship. And then from White House Fellowship, I met Elizabeth Dole. She asked me to become the Deputy Maritime Administrator. I moved from New York to Washington to San Francisco, back to Washington in basically 3 years. And I didn't even unpack some of my boxes. And then as for my proudest moments, I'm always looking ahead. And I think that the best is still ahead. But I will say that when I became the Secretary of Labor, and it was the first Asian American female to go into the cabinet, I was just overwhelmed by the good wishes, by the tsunami, the avalanche of good wishes sent by the community and from throughout the country. Faxes and emails and letters. And I felt a very special sense of responsibility to not disappoint people and to do the best job that I could. So that was very special.
Okay,
Similar to the
now let me turn to the questions from the audience. Here's an interesting one. Unlike some other groups, Asian Americans aren't strongly associated with one political party. Is that true? But instead are largely split between the Republicans and Democrats. Do you think this diffuses our potential political power? And if so, is there a way to unify Asian Americans on at least some issues? Who would like to begin?
Well,
Yes, Judy.
I have a lot to say on this because I was very proud of our Asian American community because the turnout in this last presidential election was enormous. The early voting increase was 300% more than what it was in 2016. And for young people, it was 400% more for Asian American youth. So I was proud of our Asian American community because they raised their voices. They actually participated and cast their votes. And another interesting thing to look at is Georgia. Georgia had an increase of Asian American voters of 91%, and 30,000 of them were first-time voters. I thought that was such an enormous step forward because they were there in the database from before, but they felt energized enough to actually cast their vote. And when you have that kind of voter turnout, you can truly make a difference in these elections.
Elaine?
I think it's good that Asian Americans are split. That means that both parties have to vie for their votes. And, I think people should vote what their conscience says and what what they feel strongly about. And we are not a homogeneous community. So we vote according to what issues we feel strongly about and who we would like to support. So I think that's quite healthy.
You don't think the Asian Americans will be like the Blacks, become basically a one party?
Well, African Americans, Judy, maybe you will know better, but African Americans sometimes complain, and I don't mean to insult anyone, that the being affiliated with one party, they get taken for granted. Now we have to learn to exercise our voices, and certainly the Asian American swing vote in 7 key Asian American votes in 7 key swing states is a very important part of our electoral clout. So we're learning to exercise our influence.
Well,
go ahead, Judy.
No, I gave those statistics because basically we had a huge number of voters that had not been anticipated earlier. Actually, I think that the worst situation is to have low voter turnout. That's when the people from both parties do not pay attention to you. But having the high voter turnout means that those from both parties go after you and they want your vote. And that means that you have more political power.
Mm-hmm. Well, having our voices heard, there are quite a few questions about the anti-Asian hate crimes. What can we do about it, basically? Combining all these questions that have been raised about this.
Well, I've been involved with this for the past year, ever since the hate crime started increasing. And it was due to the usage of the term. It was basically exacerbated by the usage of these terms: Wuhan virus, China virus, Kung flu, and all that. So we, in our Congressional Asian Pacific Caucus, did everything that we could, first of all, to educate people not to use those terms because they were clearly exacerbating the situation. We were encouraging people to report on the hate crime websites. In fact, there's a very good one, Stop AAPI Hate. It and the other hate crime sites have documented over 3,000 hate crimes that have occurred since the beginning of last year. But it's important for people to report because we need to be able to track what's going on. Also, people don't feel as isolated when they report. And of course, we've educated the community. We had the first ever national town hall that was sponsored by NBC, and we had hearings as well as bills that we put forth. In fact, we had a resolution on the House floor condemning anti-Asian hate crimes due to coronavirus. This recent this recent round of hate crimes shows us that our job is not done, and we have to be as proactive as ever. So actually, I'm having a press conference that I'm leading tomorrow morning, and it is a tri-caucus press conference where we'll be joined by our leaders of the Black Caucus and the Hispanic Caucus in Congress. They're showing their support to us and saying that people need to stop this. I also want to say that there are trainings in bystander interventions that are being done. That is, sometimes you see somebody saying something negative and a slur, a racial slur. What do you do about it? Well, there are the 5 Ds of bystander training, things that you can do to be more proactive, such as document. Pull out your iPhone and video that thing. That can help, especially in catching a perpetrator.
Elaine, you have something to add?
I think these, I think these hate crimes are very, very disturbing. And when I was co-chair, as I mentioned, for the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, due to the COVID-19 crisis, obviously, we also tried to address this. I don't disagree with the Congressman at all. I think language does make a difference, and I think rhetoric does make a difference. But I think also what's exacerbating all of this, which is something that most Asian Americans, and I certainly did not get involved in foreign policy because that was never my lane. But I think all of these anti-Asian, anti-Chinese sentiments are exacerbated by the very deteriorating relations between US and China. I think if that bilateral relationship were not so tense, that, a lot of this, the underbelly of this issue would not be so, I don't know, I'm getting my ideologies mixed up, but it would not be so intense. I think underneath it all,
research has shown there's definitely a
deterioration in this bilateral relationship
between the state of US-China relationship and the attitudes of Americans towards Chinese. And American attitudes towards China and Chinese are at their lowest. 70% of Americans have an unfavorable view of China. It's interesting because you said you're not in the foreign policy lane. However,
if I can just correct that. A lot of us take offense when some politician thinks that we care about the politics of our, ancestral land, when that's not necessarily so.
Oh, I see what you're, no, yeah. But we do have Asian Americans who are living in China. We have also Chinese in the audience, and there are questions. If either of you would like to comment on the state of US-China relations, and how do you see that actually, some of the questions relate to how they affect Asian Americans? And how do Asian Americans feel about US-China?
Clearly, yeah. Maybe Congressman, I'll go first, and then please go ahead. I think clearly this deteriorating bilateral relationship hurts Asian Americans, not just Chinese Americans, because a lot of people can't tell the difference between Japanese Americans, Korean Americans, and Chinese Americans. Absolutely. And the fact that certain members of our establishment elites think that the majority of students coming into American universities are spies. Intelligent, leaders, many of them. While industrial espionage does occur, this is such a sensitive area that it's really hard for anyone to tread because, again, it's engulfed in national security. So it's enveloped in, what's really frightening. So I think this is a tough issue. I don't know, Congressman, how do you see that?
The deterioration of U.S.-China relationship has hurt Americans and people in China, actually, but especially Chinese Americans, Asian Americans in this country. And we have become the targets because of that. And we have seen Chinese scientists and engineers being targeted for being spies for China, innocent people that have been arrested and their lives ruined because of these kinds of accusations. So there has to be a reset, in my opinion. There is always going to be a tension between the U.S. and China, as there would be with any country. But there also have to be productive kinds of relationships that are rebuilt, where we can work together. And that's what I look forward to. I think if that happens, then things will improve considerably. Though I do have to say, one of the other issues that I fight hard on in Congress is on preventing the racial profiling of Chinese scientists and engineers.
Okay, we have another interesting question. It really has to do with the perpetual foreigner syndrome that Asian Americans suffer. I mean, how many times have you been asked, my, you speak beautiful English. How did you manage? But the question says, how have you dealt with feeling that you are being perceived differently? Both, in social situations and in the public eye, due to your appearance. Don't you remember? Certainly I remember from my younger days.
Of course.
When I was the only Asian face in the room, if not the only woman's face. So we've all gone through that. So how do you deal with it? This is what the question is about.
Well,
right? Judy?
Well, I am fortunate enough to be in a position where I'm constantly speaking, and I haven't had it recently. Certainly growing up, I had enough of that, which is where people came up to me and said, where are you from? Then I would say, Los Angeles. And they would say, where are you really from? Or they would come up to me and say, you speak English so well. So yeah, we have had to deal with that on a continuous basis. The perpetual foreigner stereotype is one of the most serious stereotypes that we have as Asian Americans. And that's why it is so important for us to be active, for us to raise our voices in American politics, and to show that we are a very important part of America.
Okay.
I've evolved on this. We all have encountered this, no question about it. When I was younger, it used to really irritate me. Maybe I'm gotten older and I've mellowed out. I now realize also that there are actually people who have no malice. They just don't know any better.
Mm.
And as our country becomes more diverse, we're seeing less and less of that.
Okay.
So, yeah, I just think, I think the most important thing is not to let those acts damage your self-esteem. And you know who you are. My parents, again, I refer to them because they're so, so wonderful. But my mother always said, not in these words, but that's what she says, know your worth. I know your worth. You need to know your worth. And if you know what your worth is, you don't take crap from anybody else. And if they did something nasty to you, which we've all experienced, doesn't matter because I know what my own worth is. And that's a very important aspect of developing, I think, young, confident children.
There's a follow-up question to this, and we're, by the way, coming close to finishing time, and I want to get at least 2 more questions in. This follow-up question is interesting. How do you rebut charges that you have divided loyalties just because of the color of your skin?
I'm the target of incredibly nasty, malicious, deliberate attacks that claim my family has business interest with China, which is not true. But I do think if I can get hit like that, I think about others who are more vulnerable, who don't have the means or the courage to fight back, and that's why I would think the Congresswoman and we're fighting the same battles, perhaps in different ways with different issues, but that's where you have to have the gumption to fight, and you have to have your voices heard. And it's a continual effort. It's gotten much better than when I was here, 20, 30 years ago, but there's still a ways ahead, not only for us, but for many other groups as well. So,
Judy?
I remember when Matt Fong ran for a California, I think it might have been California Senate. What I remember is that there was an interview and a reporter asked him, if war broke out between US and China, which side would you be on? Can you imagine that? That they would even think that you were not an American? That is what we face. But actually, we have people that are the victims of these stereotypes on a daily basis. And again, the racial profiling of Chinese scientists and engineers. I've had to defend Professor Xiaosheng Qi, who was accused of being a spy for China because he had developed some kind of space fan, and his name was dragged across the newspapers as a spy for China. He was arrested and threatened with 80 years in jail. And then the FBI found that they had that it was incorrect what they had accused him of, and just dropped it without any explanation. So we have people that are the victims of that, and we have to speak up for them to make sure that this does not happen to other people.
We are really coming to the close, but I have to get one more question in, and this is the last one. There's a question about the model minority concept, or what do you think? Do you think it's good? It's bad? Is it beneficial to us? Is it harmful to us? How do you deal with the model minority concept?
well, I think sorry, Congressman, I think it's rooted in our culture. I think it's for all the reasons that we just said, I think it's cultural. But I think as more and more Asian Americans come into this country and they become more acclimated to the environment here, they're beginning to speak up. I think that model minority is going to be, that model minority reputation or image is going to change, and it's changing now. We see much more forceful second and third generations of people speaking up. So I think it will change.
Judy?
I'm really concerned about it. And in fact, I'm fighting it right now because of what I see as people not thinking that AAPIs are hurt by coronavirus. There actually is a disproportionate impact of coronavirus on communities of color, including the AAPI community. And so in this COVID bill that we are trying to pass right now, finally, there is some attention and resources being paid to address this issue. But yes, we actually have more deaths this year as an AAPI community than in the past 5 years. There has been a definite increase, and yet that information has not come out. So it is important, if we're ever to get resources and if we are ever to solve these problems, that we do not have this model minority. I think it's harmful.
The Asian American community actually has been devastated by the COVID-19 because a disproportionate number of Asian Americans are small, self-owned entrepreneurs, businesses. And the unemployment rate in the Asian American community, which has traditionally been one of the lowest at about 2.3% pre-COVID, surged to about 14% because of COVID-19. And so the assistance to the community in terms of helping these small businesses owners and other communities, other community participants or, residents is very important.
Well, this conversation just shows that we need to have more. But time has come to conclude this program. I want to thank you. Say really, really thank you to our two amazing trailblazers, Secretary Lang Chao and Congresswoman Judy Chu. We appreciate you both sharing your valuable time and life experiences with us today, inspiring us all. And may I ask you to a favor, because we have questions that I could not get to, but may we gather up some of these questions, not many, and should they be relevant, then we can send them on to you, and maybe
Sure.
you would answer them. Okay. Sure. Thank you again for that.
We should also thank our moderator.
Oh, no. It's something that I have wanted to do for a very long time, to showcase the brilliance of Asian American women leaders. And now, especially at a time when COVID-19 has spiked a surge in anti-Asian hate crimes around the country, I think it is more important than ever that we do what we're doing here. And I want to really also thank the Congressional Bank and the Ruth Guo and Rhoda Howe Memorial Fund, as well as our individual donors. We have individual donors to this program. They care for supporting USET and for making this series possible. Let me really conclude by sharing a saying with everyone. You can't be what you can't see. So for all Asian women in our audience today, I think you have seen what you can be. So go for it. And may I wish you all a happy Chinese New Year, the year of the ox. 新年快乐，牛年大吉. Please watch for the next program and see you all there. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us. Good night or good morning. Bye-bye.